heard a story about a church van driver who was out. I guess he was visiting friends in the community. Went to a neighborhood that some of his friends lived in. And while he was there, he ran into this 8-year-old boy. You know, they run around, they play. And the bus driver said, you know, on Sundays, I drive through this neighborhood and I pick up kids who want to go to church. You wouldn't happen to be interested in going to church one of these days? He said, oh, sure, I'd like to go. Well, is your mom or dad home? Talk to them ahead of time. No, it's all right. They're not here much anyway. So Sunday morning, he's driving the church van, and sure enough, this young boy is ready to go to church. Bounces out, but he's wearing the same clothes he was wearing last Wednesday. It's all right. He gets in the vehicle, and they come to church, and the bus driver takes this young boy to meet his Sunday school teacher. And the Sunday school teacher is so excited to have him in class, and they welcome him, they talk about Jesus, it's all nice and good. After Sunday school, of course, is church. So the Sunday school teacher brings this new student to a big church. And they sit right there, and the carpet is nice and everything is pretty. The preacher talks about Jesus, the choir sings about Jesus, everything is Jesus. Jesus. So he's, what is this about? Then sometime during the service, 2 guys come along with shiny plates. And they begin to pass it back and forth, row by row. And he's not sure what it's about, so he's watching his new teacher. That's what you do. You watch to see what they do here. And the teacher put some money in that shiny plate. And he leans over and says, now, what is that for? Teacher says, well, that is for Jesus. Oh. He said, I don't have anything. I wish I... So the plate passes him, but it usually comes back, the back row. So as it's coming back, he stops it. And the usher gets a little concerned. And he holds onto the plate, and he's trying to hold on to it. So the usher gingerly, you don't want to create a scene in church, gingerly lets the plate go. And it's a tense moment. And he stands in the middle of the aisle, he puts the plate down, and he stands in it. And he says, dear Jesus, I have nothing to give to you but me. That is such powerful truth. It's amazing sometimes where such truth comes from. Next week is Consecration Sunday. When you think of Consecration Sunday, what do you think of? Some of us perhaps think of, well, that's Money Sunday. Is there anything I can do? Do I have anything else on my schedule? That's Money Sunday. If there's some way I could perhaps not be there, it's Money Sunday. That's not a subject. I go to church to worship and to bring up money. Oh, I deal with that all the time. I just want a break. I can understand that. Maybe for you, Consecration Sunday brings up an image of conversations at home. Maybe you were so fortunate to live with adults who were willing to talk with you about their giving. Maybe it was a conversation around the dinner table where the cards were passed out, and there wasn't only the family card we were going to fill out, and you heard conversation about how much we're giving and why. But then you were challenged to fill out your own card too. After all, you earn a little allowance in this family, things you can do, and maybe you can give some of that as an act of worship. Maybe that is the image that comes to mind for you. But next week is Consecration Sunday. And what I want to talk with you about today is one central truth that I hope you can hold on to. That the Consecration Sunday is not about money. Consecration Sunday is not about money. Consecration, if you look into the Bible or the dictionary, consecration is about setting something aside for a specific purpose. So it may be time, it may be effort, it may be gifts, it may be talents. So we're going to take some time to talk about consecration, what it means, what it's about. But it is not about money. Well, what is it about? Most of us know about a guy by the name of Saul, Saul of Tarsus. Saul was a dedicated Jew, well-trained. He didn't talk, he acted. And he decided that the people of the way were a distraction, in fact, a disgrace to the Jewish community. And so he persecuted the church. And one day on his way to Damascus, Jesus appears to Saul and knocks him off his high horse, literally. He wakes up blind. He's blind for 3 days. He now becomes an advocate for the church, a disciple of Jesus Christ. He forms so many churches, and one of those churches is the church of Corinth. He's in Corinth for probably a year and a half, teaching them the ways of Christ. And as always, there's trouble after he leaves. So he writes a letter to the people of Corinth to talk to them about something that he was working on. And I'd like you to turn your Bibles, if you will, to page 1801. We're going to be looking at 2 Corinthians today for just a little bit. 2 Corinthians chapter 8. Those blue Bibles, page 1801. 2 Corinthians chapter 8. A little background of what is happening here. There is a church or a series of churches, a group of churches in a province called Macedonia. And chapter 1, verse 1 of chapter 8 says, "And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given to the Macedonian churches." I like how Paul begins. It's all about grace, you see. It's all about grace. The grace that God has given to the Macedonian churches. We want you to know something about that grace. What is grace? Well, when we talk about grace, we're talking about God's work in us, right? The forgiveness of sins, God's work for us, God's work on our behalf, the love of God, the grace of God. That's what we talk about when we talk about grace. But you see, grace is not only God's work in us and God's work for us, grace is also God's work through us. Grace is also God's work through us. What God can accomplish through us on behalf of somebody else. That's also God's work of grace. God's work in you, God's work for you, God's work through you. Grace. I know of two bodies of water in the Holy Land. There is a Sea of Galilee, and there is the Dead Sea. The Jordan River, which begins somewhere in Syria and flows through the Jordan Valley, empties at first into the Sea of Galilee, which is not a sea at all. It's actually a lake, okay? It's called the Sea of Galilee. And then it passes through the Sea of Galilee, continues on, and ends up in the Dead Sea. And that's it. Nothing that goes into the Dead Sea comes out. The Dead Sea is an end all to itself. So you've got the Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee. I noticed when I was there several years ago that the Sea of Galilee has life in it. People fish in the Sea of Galilee. They swim, they play. There are all kinds of fun activities in the Sea of Galilee. The Dead Sea, on the other hand, is a very intense place. Yes, there is a very fun thing you can do in the Dead Sea. That is, you can literally sit on the water because it has so much salt in it. But you don't want any of that in your eyes. I can still remember it. So, like the Sea of Galilee, when our life becomes a conduit of grace, plenty of life happens in our life when grace passes through. Are you with me this morning? Versus the Dead Sea that says everything that comes into my hands is for me and I hold on to it. And the Dead Sea is, to be frank, is just a dead place. So which one would you like to be? A person through which grace works? Or a person who just receives grace and says, well, isn't it nice? Thank you very much. I mean, think about forgiveness. Think about forgiveness. The people who have received forgiveness and know they have received forgiveness are the ones who are also willing to extend forgiveness. Jesus said those that have been forgiven much love much. That's the idea. When you receive it, truly, it passes through and becomes a blessing unto others. Dead Sea, Sea of Galilee. So this grace that has passed through the people of Macedonia, Paul wanted this church to know about. He says that they were people, verse 2, who out of their most severe trial were overflowing with joy, and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, even beyond their ability, entirely on their own. What does entirely on their own mean? They were not even asked. There were people who were in such poverty, such need, such trial, that they were not even asked to contribute. They somehow found out. And they gave entirely on their own. They urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in the service to the saints. Service to the saints, what are we talking about? Here's the background, real quick. The church in Jerusalem was in trouble. Church in Jerusalem, of course, is made up mostly of what? Jews, right? The Jerusalem church, Jews lived there. Well, the church in Jerusalem was in trouble. They were having some financial difficulties, leadership difficulties, we don't know, but it was difficult. And Paul decided that he would go to the Gentile churches, the non-Jewish churches, and he was going to collect an offering, money, from the Gentile churches, take it to the Jerusalem churches. That was the mission. But it wasn't about the money. It was about something else. It was, in fact, about church unity. Because these Jews over here had always wondered what to do with the Gentiles. Always wondered what to do. Are the Gentiles in? Are they out? Are they really our brothers and sisters? Well, we don't know. Back and forth. This is an ongoing issue with the church. Somebody is always finding something, some reason to say somebody is not quite in. All right? So the Jewish church in Jerusalem is struggling with this issue. The Gentiles are also not quite sure. Are we welcome? Are we there? So Paul says, all right, you guys are in trouble. We're going to get money from these people. We're going to bring it over here. And the real agenda is to forge some sense of unity. He's not even sure if the Jewish church will get the money and receive it with joy. They might just turn their noses up at it. So there's a lot going on here. And these Macedonians find out. And they catch the vision that Paul is casting. This is not just about money. This is about us being a family together. And they say, we are under persecution. We are dealing with extreme poverty. We've not even been asked. But we want the privilege of being part of it. We wanted to be part of it. And they gave beyond their ability to do so. Verse 5 says, and they did not do as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord and then to us in keeping with God's will. When I read this, I stopped right here. This is the secret of the Macedonian church, verse 5. If you want to underline it, right? Putting first things first. They said first and foremost, the secret of the Macedonian church is that they gave themselves first and foremost to the Lord and then to us, according to God's will. Now, what does it mean to give themselves to the Lord? What does that mean? It was not a confession of faith. They were already believers. They were already in the church. They gave themselves to the Lord. What it meant was they caught the vision, the mission of the church, this unity that Paul was working. They caught it, and they said, we want to be part of that. So on the Sunday before Consecration Sunday, let's review our mission for just a little bit, shall we? Our mission, let's say together, is to love God, know Christ, care for one another, and joyfully share the good news of Jesus Christ. That's the mission. That's what we're here for. That's what I'm asking you to commit to. Not to me. Goodness, no. Not to any particular leader, although we work very hard to be trustworthy and all that. But first and foremost, they committed themselves to the Lord. To the Lord. Because I'm telling you, if you move your attention from committing yourself to the Lord to any person, then it's just a question of who you like and who you don't like, isn't it? Who you respect and who you don't respect. Then it becomes about people. First and foremost. That's not to say people are not to be trustworthy and do a good job. We're working hard. I mean, I've got a session that holds my feet to the fire with a deacon thrown in there to boot. But it cannot be about people. Cannot be about people. They committed themselves first and foremost to who? To the Lord. And then to us, according to the will of God. So that's our mission. But if you are at a party and somebody asks you, well, so you love God and know Christ and care for one another and joyfully share the good news of Jesus Christ, why do you do all of that? Why do you do that? My answer is that we do that to help people see Jesus. That's my answer. Love God. That's worship as a lifestyle, worship as a habit. That somehow through that effort, other people will come to see Jesus. Know Christ, that service. Somehow through that effort, other people will come to see Jesus. Caring for one another. Real, meaningful relationships through small groups. Didn't Jesus say they will know you are my disciples by your what? By your love. Somehow, people will come to know Jesus through that. Joyfully sharing the good news. Giving generously, inviting others. For me, the reason is so that people may get to know Jesus, because once that happens, everything changes. That's what it's about for me. What is it about for you? Can I invite you today to commit to the mission of the church? Not to any person, to the mission of the church. To the mission of the church. Let us pray.